This time, we are the Indians. I've read many essays and papers looking for either that one essay filled with explanation, solution, and hope, or a constellation of essays and papers capable, in compilation, of these same virtues. There are many that nibble at the edges, but not one has been the Salk vaccine for our systemic polio. But I know that there are hundreds of pure geniuses and thousands of really smart, motivated people trying to answer the questions of our time, as well as trying to produce prescriptions for present and future actions. And if all this effort could be brought together, it should be possible to design a plan for how to effectively address the major and even minor issues of our time, unless we, the great many, are not at all what matter, but are more and more seen to be in the way of the future, in the way of a manifest destiny as seen by the plutocrats and oligarchs who increasingly rule this nation and world. The great we would be then the aboriginals, and many of our issues, our troubles, would be coming from oligarchic invaders. We may seek solutions, but as in the conflict of the Indians and European settlers, what was good for the settlers was definitely not good for the Indians, and vice versa. There was just no way to compromise the clash of realities. That is more and more seeming to be the true design of our present difficulties. There is not a compromised position waiting, as yet undiscovered. No solution that is eluding us. Ultimately, the invaders took what they wanted. The Indians were given no satisfactory option. Their last big push at solution to their dilemma was the ghost dance, a pure fantasy Indian fundamentalism based in the insanity that the invaders could be disappeared if the people only acted correctly, the victims having only the power to use their helplessness, and so tried to remake that helplessness into a source of power. Examples for today of something similar are all too available. We have seen what happens when we use our helplessness alone to stand against the press of mad power. Our present situation is, however, not the same in all ways, even if the great many are to be the Indians, and the people suckling on the corporate oligarchy are the Europeans, or the Borg of Star Trek, and it certainly is looking like that is the model. The only way for it to work is for the great many to believe that they are helpless. Well, the Indians didn't believe themselves helpless even when ultimately they were. We often believe ourselves helpless when ultimately we are not. I have no way of knowing, which is its own issue, whether the symphony of events making up the social presentation of life and culture comes from some coordinated plan or is just the social and economic processes run amok. But it is clear that the flood of information into and onto the great many is largely untrue, fear-producing, emotionally addictive, power-draining, action-stopping, and, did I say, untrue. The most simple-minded example, clearly tipping the oligarchy hand for those able to listen, was the admonition to go shopping after the 9/11 2001 incidents. And the slightly more subtle, this changes everything, really meant, this makes it possible to be more open about the invasions and evasions of public rights and responsibilities that have been in process for some time. If we are to be the Indians, then, we have to believe ourselves small and helpless. Otherwise, our great numbers and the fact that it is the great many that makes the whole thing go could, at any moment, overwhelm the corporate oligarchy. Think about it. What is the message from the media? Is it that each and every one is powerful? Or is it that you will be crushed by the economy if you don't have a credit score in the 700s? Is it that you should organize with like-minded people to live a fully satisfying life? Or is it that there are serial killers on every street, gangs rule the neighborhoods, be afraid? Is it to use your resources wisely and live for the human and community pleasures of life? Or is it that success is money, possessions, and uncommitted sex, regardless of how you get them, and all attainable only by full admission and commitment to the individualist and materialist religion? Another message is that the oligarchs are really us, that we have the same interests, and that we are to aspire to be them. And since we have the same interests, we, who are not them, should do what is good for the we who are them. This is, of course, madness. If we are the same, then there is no reason to aspire to be them. Why would all of the variety of the great many want to live the narrow description and pathology of the corporate princelings? But, as I said, our present situation is not a few disorganized, weakly armed bands of us facing the vast numbers of white eyes who are like the stars of the sky. There are over 3 million of us, and a few million of them, the oligarchs. We are the stars of the sky. We also, actually, in the most fundamental ways, control everything. Rest assured that all but the most disinterested of the oligarchs know that, and rest disturbed. What we are, however, is disorganized. We have the wealth collectively, we have the numbers, we have many of the real levers of action. We do not have the education. We do not have the organization. We do not have the leadership, and we lack many of the intermediate tools of organization, control, and coercion. By this I mean we don't control police functions or many economic tools. Our main power can come from the withholding of our support for the present order. If we do this individually, the effect is insignificant. Done in large numbers, the effect is devastatingly powerful. The Indians did not have this option, even though sometimes they tried to use it by refusing to be part of the reservation system, and so were simply allowed, in many cases, to die in foodless winter camps, hounded by the army and the settlers, or were hunted down and killed in major and minor massacres. If the great many could decide to hold a general strike, it would not be like a few starving Indians refusing to be driven onto a reservation and easily ignored. What would be required for the great many to regain control of their lives and destinies? Often, even thinking about that question is what is missing. We would need what we do not have: clear understanding of our real power, organization, leadership, some intermediate forms of power, mainly through organization that could use our collected wealth, a single important focusing of common interest, and the communication and courage to use our ultimate weapon, the en masse refusal to give our support to the oligarchy. The oligarchy invaders of the economic land where we all live has come to believe that the amassing of wealth and the manifestations of power seen in the sycophantic actions of those subordinate to them give them the advantages of a conqueror. We can see this displayed more and more every day as it becomes increasingly impossible to hide flagrant assumptions of and abuses of power. The granting of nearly unlimited personhood to corporations, the willful violation of antitrust laws in corporate mergers, the direct writing of legislation by the corporations intended to be regulated by those same laws, the seamless movement of members of the oligarchy between corporations and government, the obvious and unchallenged lying, obvious to those who read and remember, of just about everyone in power, the clear ownership of political leaders by corporate interests, the rule of law for the weak, the rule of man for the powerful, and on we could go. But the oligarchs are only in control because the great many have been doing as they are told, and believing what they are told. While I can find no rule in physics or psychology to support it, it seems to me that people will eventually reject identifiable lying, even if there is nothing else to take its place. The people of the old Soviet Union in large numbers came to understand that nothing they were told could be believed. This is both empowering and disempowering. Empowering, since it is not the lie that is acted on, but disempowering because there is very little reliable information that can be used. As the Russian people became more and more demoralized, the Soviet Union became weaker and weaker, a hollow shell, and eventually an international criminal enterprise. This is the direction in which the U.S. is heading. While some might say we are already there, I don't think so quite yet, though we are close. If the population becomes less educated and less critical of in their collective thinking, if laws and rules are passed and enforced that further limit popular organization and expression, the de facto impossibility of political third parties, for example, we will be left with only the general refusal to give our work and skills to the corporate state as a means of expression. There are still many people who believe in God and country, who have been conned into rooting for the home team. People who are being fooled by wedge issue strategies. Others continue to believe that they are just one lucky move away from becoming a junior associate princeling themselves. Still others would rather go along to get along, watching their P's and Q's, and generally clichéing their making no waves way of life through life. As this goes on, the dishonesty becomes unavoidable. Confidence is shattered. And like the standing buildings after a big earthquake, there can be unseen, serious structural damage. Whether the great many realizes that we must take on our true power will decide our fate. There is no question that the powerful will not give up the status of princeling without a fight. All the complexity really does come down to the Indians, the people, versus the settlers, the oligarchs. But this time the people have the power if they realize it. Had the Indians been able in the beginning to organize the many different tribes, the invaders could have been pushed into the sea. Piecemeal legalities have lost their possibility. The oligarchs too entrenched. Only a general strike can put the immunity class in their place and make clear who holds the ultimate power. And that tool is available to us. If we are lucky and have the right leaders, such a strike, properly followed up with political action, could reset the clock on the entropy of our democratic system, though it could also speed us along the way to a criminal state. But doing nothing will guarantee a victory for the corporate invaders and our enslavement on the national reservation that was also once our own land. This was written 15 years ago. The allusion to the ghost dance, which originated with the Paiutes in Nevada at the end of the last century, but spread across most of the western tribes and became especially associated with the northern plains, was a sort of passing reference. It seemed to represent a model response to overwhelming powers degrading valued patterns of life, and offered a chance to briefly explore the idea of how helplessness in the face of such power leads to efforts to create a sense of sovereignty in other ways than actual direct power over actual events. The essence of the ghost dance mysticism was that prescribed personal actions and specific religious practices would return the people to power over their own lives, remove the forces dominating them, and restore a lost way of life that was both imagined and real. It seemed to me 15 years ago that the desperation of the ghost dance was a caution for what we were facing at the time. Today it seems that there are important parts of the society on the way to our own ghost dance. The manifesting movements, personal descriptions and rituals that are intended to control human and physical events. The co-opting of religious rituals as manifesting powers. The long-standing, mostly benign, self-help practitioners and related sorts creating personal actions and rituals that will bring about the great changes and whisk away evil, once sincere enough and broadly followed. Perhaps we really are to be the Indians this time as well.